for any addition, and Alan would approve or decline what I put forward. So that was part of the job. And the other part of the job was that we would sell adverts, primarily in those days, to bookmakers, tipsters and consumer advertisers. So I started doing that with no journalistic involvement whatsoever, but then eventually I started doing a few freelance pieces of writing and was able to get on the writing team.
You did become a Racing Post journalist, a writer. What's the daily routine for somebody like yourself? And do you get to go racing very much?
Yes. So in terms of the daily routine, it sort of depends what you're doing within the business as a journalist. So the majority of the writing team, I guess, in the Racing Post will be looking after news shifts, and the majority of those people will be chasing news stories. They'll be looking at preview. So, for example, on a Friday, a lot of the writing team will be looking at previews of the Saturday racing. So they'll be ringing up trainers for previews. They'll be analysing races. We obviously have people on shifts who work as tipsters, people who work as sub-editors, and they're absolutely vital to how the operation goes. So they will look at your copy, they'll make any changes to your copy, they'll lay your copy out on the pages. My daily routine is a bit different because I am officially a feature writer primarily for the Racing Post. So in any week, I will be working on a series of features. So right now, as we speak, I am working on two pieces, one of which will be part of our pre-Cheltenham Festival coverage. It's a piece looking at how the Champion Hurdle has changed over years from being a race that was often competed and won by high-class flat horses to where we are now. And the other one I'm looking at has been a piece marking the 25th anniversary of the Bomb Scare Monday Grand National. So my daily routine for pieces like that often involves spending an awful lot of time on the phone, because you are ringing people for those pieces to get voices into those pieces, to quote people in those pieces. So you spend a lot of time talking to people, preparing questions for conversations, as you've been doing for this here today, transcribing conversations, which often is the most boring part of the job, because you can spend sometimes... my most recent length record was I did an interview in person with someone, which was 3 hours. Wow. And you have to transcribe all that. Yeah. Because you don't really know until you've transcribed it what you're going to use and what you're not going to use. Sure. So that has been that's my routine for this week. But often I will be out physically interviewing somebody. So it's very usual for me on a Monday or Tuesday to be on the road and actually going to see someone. So in recent weeks, it's been people like David Ellsworth I went to see for an interview. But I would go off and see anyone from, say, last year, people included Leona Mayer and Bryony Frost and Jamie Spencer, Frankie Dettori. You'll see all sorts of different people for interviews. So that's my midweek tends to be based around feature writing, going off to see people for interviews. Saturdays I tend to be on a racecourse. So normally I'll be at the main meeting on a Saturday. So I was at Ascot, as we're talking now, last Saturday for the Clarence House Chase. I'll also be on a racecourse, the big festival meeting. So Cheltenham, Aintree, York, Royal Ascot. I'll tend to be away from home for those as well. And Sundays, I also work every Sunday because I do a column in the Racing Post on a Monday, or Monday's print edition, and that gets written on a Sunday. Weekends tend to be completely working weekends, and I'll get odd days off during the week. I tend to find that work stretches out sometimes, so you often work in bits of your day off as well, but that's fine because realistically I get paid to do my hobby. My old man used to work in a factory, and that felt more like a proper job. What I do is a pleasure, really.
I think probably Simon and I can probably relate to that as well, Lee, because we get to do the same thing, yeah.
I was about to say that, Phil. Yeah, I do a lot of networking, and I get the mickey taken out of me all the time. They just think I go around betting and drinking champagne. So, yeah, I know the feeling about being a proper job. But anyway, Phil, you were about to ask something there. Come in, Phil.
Yeah. It was wondering, really, Lee, you get to write about some interesting things, but do you get to decide what you write about, or is there a sort of an allocation of articles, and can you sort of express your own views, or do you have to take a Racing Post line on things?
Yeah, interesting question. So in terms of what I'm doing myself, particularly as a feature writer, for example, when I'm doing interviews or feature projects, I will work with a features editor, a guy called Dylan Hill, who looks after that part of the business, because most of what I do forms part of our premium content. So I will work with them, and Dylan Hill will, alongside the editor, Tom Kerr, and our head of content, John Hopkins, together will come up with ideas for pieces, and we have sort of regular meetings to talk about ideas for pieces. So in that sense, it's quite a collaborative process. On a daily basis, the people who are writing the news stories, which I still do sometimes, but the people who are doing that, they will work under a news editor every day, and the news editor's job is to produce a flow of content through the day, to try and map out the day, so that they will they'll come up with the stories, ideas for the day. They will try and plan when those stories in an ideal world would be published. But of course, what you find in a news environment is you're frequently overtaken by events. So at 4 p.m. on a day, you might think you have pages 1 to 7 completely mapped out, and then something happens within the racing world that can cause you to completely change that. So it's a very organic thing that's always moving around. In terms of opinions, and can you express your view? Well, clearly, I think a bit like a football team plays according to the wishes of the manager. And any newspaper will, to an extent, reflect the leadership of the editor. And that's how it should be. So the editor will have views on how things should be presented and expressed, and will have opinions. A lot of what we do is news coverage, and a news piece really should just present the news as opposed to expressing opinion. We clearly do comment pieces, and they will be the writer's opinion, generally approved by the editor. But for something like, say, a column, so I have a column every Monday, that will invariably be, well, it will be what I think. And sometimes there are differences of opinion. So, for example, if we go back to around not too far from this time last year, March last year, we had the big Gordon Elliott story, and there were columns and opinions expressed in the Racing Post by Racing Post writers that were very different to each other. So people like myself and Tom Kerr, the editor, were writing column and comment pieces that were very different to the views expressed by some other Racing Post writers like David Jennings or Richard Forrestal, and that's a good thing. We shouldn't be robots. We should be challenging each other's opinions, and I think it's a healthy thing that different people have different views within one organisation. So yeah, there will be very few things I can think of, guys, that would have a Racing Post view. Racing Post writers will have views, and will have sometimes Racing Post comment pieces, but there aren't really Racing Post diktats in terms of positions to take on certain subjects.
That's quite interesting. So there's some sort of controversy, I guess, or controversial opinions between even the journalists. Obviously, there's going to also be controversial opinions between, something you might write and somebody else in the industry might sort of take umbrage to your opinion. Do people tend to accept that it's just you doing your job, or do grudges get held, and does it make people difficult to deal with sometimes when you need to?
Yes, so a bit of both, really. So particularly those of us who write columns in the Racing Post, our job is to express opinions. And I don't think there is much point having a column if you're just going to use it to sit on a fence. I think you have to say what you believe within, obviously, certain boundaries. There are sometimes things I would love to say in a Racing Post column, which aren't always possible because the Racing Post has a responsibility to the racing industry, and we sometimes have to be careful what we do say. And it's not necessarily hard to think what those sort of subjects might be, where you might sometimes have to restrain yourself in what you might wish to think. But generally speaking, we say what we think as columnists. Sometimes we will be proved right, sometimes we'll be proved wrong. And there are certainly things that I've written that with hindsight, I wish I'd done differently or expressed a different point of view. But you're sincere in what you say at the time. And as you say, Phil, sometimes that will inevitably upset some people. What you tend to find is a lot of people are very good with that, and they will understand that just because I say something that is critical of you or expresses a different position to one that you hold, I'm not saying that you are the devil incarnate. I'm just saying that I disagree with you on something. And I think something that racing needs to be better at is we need to be better at disagreeing with each other. I found myself in the last year or two that things tend to be very black and white in terms of how people receive ideas and opinions. And I think we need to try and move more towards debating in the middle ground, because very generally, I don't think there is a black and white to most things. If I express an opinion in a column, I generally would hope I am very receptive to other people's points of views. And I'll know that invariably there's entirely legitimately held points of views. I just disagree with them. I think sometimes within racing, perhaps more than in a lot of spheres, we struggle to accept that someone can have a different point of view to our own, and we need to be better at debating things, as I say, in the middle, in the centre ground.
Absolutely. That's really fascinating, Lee. Now, look, it's coming across very clearly that you're writing quite regularly on controversial and sensitive issues. Now, the gambling review is one such topic which divides opinion, doesn't it? And I really did enjoy reading your piece a few days ago on this very important subject. And for those who didn't see the article in the RP, could you perhaps summarise your concerns on this possible curtailment, which is quite serious, curtailment of our gambling freedoms?
Yes, guys. So what's happening at the moment, it's always difficult to say at the moment when we're talking about politics right now. We're expecting a white paper to be presented to Parliament by government in the spring that will reflect the findings of a review of the gambling industry that is being done by the DCMS at the moment. That will shape the gambling sector for many years to come. And at the moment, that's taking place against the backdrop of there being a very strange constituency of most unusual bedfellows who have got a real strong position anti-gambling. While they won't necessarily want to see gambling abolished, they are pushing for changes to the way gambling is regulated that will have significant impacts not just on gambling but on horse racing as well. They've been calling for things like affordability checks, which in some ways necessarily wouldn't be a bad thing if done at the right level, but they're looking at very strong affordability checks. But they're also looking for significant state surveillance of those who bet through looking at your bank accounts. So if you wanted to place a bet, in effect, you would have to allow the ombudsman to have access to your banking details, and that ombudsman would then decide if you should or should not be allowed to place that bet. So that's one stream of what the anti-gambling campaigns are pushing for. The other one is a ban on all gambling advertising, marketing and promotion. So it's analogous to what's happened in previous years with tobacco, which of course was a completely sensible thing to do. Now, the outcome of those policies, those proposals, if they were implemented, and of course that's a big if, and one would hope that the government would look at a more evidence-based review of the gambling situation. But if, say, for example, affordability checks came in at their extreme position, that would be hugely costly to horse racing. Race courses have estimated between 60 million and 100 million pounds a year. There is a view that a lot of punters just won't want to have their financial dealings open to inspection by a government ombudsman, and they'll just stop betting. And even something like an advertising ban would be hugely costly to horse racing on two fronts, really. One, sponsorship. Racecourses depend to an extent on bookmakers for sponsorship. There are not a huge number of blue chip sponsors who want to get involved in horse racing right now. That's partly because of the economic situation, but also because racing is sometimes a controversial subject for sponsors because of its association with gambling and because of sometimes perceptions of animal welfare. Some sponsors don't want to get involved in horse racing. So without bookmakers, racecourses will be hit very hard, and so therefore would prize money. But also an advertising ban would likely decimate the amount of mainstream television coverage horse racing receives, because you look at something like ITV came back into horse racing because although horse racing provides excellent content and most broadcasters would want things like the Grand National Royal Ascot, horse racing is a financial winner for ITV and for any commercial broadcaster because of bookmaker advertising. So they will make money out of doing horse racing. So this is a really serious thing.